that fine? One? Volume?
What's that?
Volume, is that fine?
Let's do a test.
Check 1 2, check 1 2. Can you guys hear all the way at the back? Good? Thumbs up? Very nice. Alright, and what time are we at now? Okay, good time. So, thank you all for your patience. Hi everyone, my name is Gallic and I'll be your host and the moderator for tonight's debate. I'm very excited to see on the candidates part. Okay. So once that's been set up, Tashi, yeah? Very on the territory. So I'd like to also acknowledge and Anishinaabe. Thank you. If any of you here affiliate yourself or identify as a First Nations community for allowing us to have this debate and the vote pop-up session from earlier today. And we hope that through the course of this dialogue, this debate, this discussion, we can reaffirm our commitment to Indigenous rights, freedom. The of the event today of Stephen Harper's administration. I know some. What does that really mean? So in the lead up to today's debate, we actually had a pop-up session. If you probably noticed, there's some ballot boxes set up in the back. Those are all to get, the young people who some of them might be voting for the first time to get a taste of what it is to actually vote on something that they believe in. And what are some of the ideas, some of the issues that are being discussed. You can see from the chart paper that's stuck on some of the wall, we had some very animated conversations. So this debate will hopefully be just a part of that. We will continue having these discussions, and then hopefully this debate will help reaffirm and clarify for some of you the questions you have to your candidates. So anyways, I don't want to keep you for too long. We have three candidates from us representing the three major political parties of Canada, minus, I know there's a burning question, where the heck is Mr. Ian Allen? So he's supposedly the Conservative candidate for Parkdale High Park. We did reach out to him. I left him tons of emails, voicemails, to no avail. So if you do see Ian Allen walking by on the sidewalk or anything, just let him know this is going down, and he's welcome to join us at any time. But unfortunately, we have to get going. So I will let the candidates introduce themselves. The way this debate will work out is each candidate will start off with an opening remark, and they will each have 3 minutes to just introduce themselves, give you a little bit of background on who they are, what they've worked on, and then what their vision, what their values, what their ideas are. Okay, so we did a quick draw, and Mr. Adam Phipps, representing the Green Party, is starting off. After that, we have Mr. Arif Virani from the Liberal Party, and then finally Ms. Peggy Nash, the incumbent from the NDP. So, take it away.
Hi everybody, it's working. Hi, my name's Adam. I'm with the Green Party of Canada. A little bit about background about myself. I've been living in Parkdale High Park for about 2 years now. I'm an artist and a musician, and I teach music as well. I used to work in film, but primarily now I do those things. I got involved in politics just recently because I really became disillusioned with kind of the way the process is undertaken, and the way that decisions are made, and the way that we choose those who make those decisions. So for me, looking at sort of the ideals of Canada that I was brought up with and I thought we would aspire to as a country, and I've just really seen those eroded for corporate interest, and so I really wanted to get involved and sort of engage with people like you who are still passionate about democracy, and engage with you guys so that we could work towards maybe making a bit of a difference and empowering people to believe that their vote actually matters and that you can make a difference. So tonight we're going to talk a lot about our policies and our platforms, but just to give you a really brief overview, what the Green Party is really proposing is a rebalance of power. So rebalancing the power away from the federal government and from corporations and special interests back towards people. Ensuring people have access to a healthy environment, have access to good jobs, affordable health care, affordable education, affordable housing, and a livable income. Excuse me. But my personal mandate is to work for you guys. So what that means is that I'm not beholden to the federal government, I'm not beholden even to the Green Party. My job and my mandate is to make sure that I exercise the will of my constituents. And the Green Party is the only party that actually supports that mandate fully. That my job is fundamentally to represent my constituents and nothing more. So tonight I'm going to ask you guys to keep an open mind. You're going to hear a lot about policy platform tonight, but just keep an open mind, and I'd ask you to sort of imagine what you think Canada should look like in 5, 10, 25 years, and ask yourself which one of the parties and which one of the representatives, more importantly, is going to work really hard on your behalf to make sure that your vision of Canada actually becomes a reality. And thanks for your time.
I was ahead of schedule. Thank you, Adam. Next up, we're keeping time, right? Okay, great. Thank you. By the way, I just wanted to quickly, before I get too far ahead, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the awesome organizers. If you can give them a big round of applause. We have a fabulous team of young, committed, passionate, young people. And young people, they've got this energy that we have to, when it's there, you have to harness it. So they've been there full 100%. So I just want to acknowledge that. And Trigan, one of our team leaders, is actually the timekeeper. So make sure you guys are on, schedule, because she's got this bell. Otherwise, you don't want to be in that space. Okay. So Mr. Virani, take it away.
Thank you. I've also got my watch here, so I'm going to try to avoid the bell. So my name is Arif Virani, as Gallic was saying. I'm the Liberal Party candidate here in Parkdale High Park. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of people from our Tibetan community, Satashi Delay. Thank you very much for being here tonight. In terms of me, some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm a human rights and constitutional lawyer. I've been practicing in that area for 14 years. I'm a local resident in Roncesvalles Village. I'm a father of 2 young boys, an active volunteer with things like here in Parkdale with the Parkdale Food Bank, with a shelter for women called the Redwood Shelter. In terms of what I bring to the table, it's a background as an advocate, fighting for clients in court. What I'd like to do is fight for you in Ottawa. In terms of some of the aspects about my upbringing and sort of how I got to this point in time, I came to this country as a refugee from Uganda. My ancestry is Indian, like many of the Tibetans who have migrated here. The path starts in India, it comes through Uganda, ends up in Toronto. I arrived here as a refugee in 1972 with the graces of a good government at that time that was welcoming refugees, as opposed to the government right now that sees refugees as an obstacle, or perhaps even as a terrorist threat. It's not my orientation, it's not the kind of government I want to see. In terms of what I've done as a human rights lawyer, I've created a legal clinic here in Toronto. It's called the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario. It services people who need access to justice. I've also returned to East Africa, where I'm from, to work as a war crimes prosecutor with the United Nations on the Rwandan Genocide Tribunal. So if you're looking for a progressive representative who's advocating for social justice causes, that is what I've done with my entire adult life. It's what I seek to do as your member of parliament. In terms of what the Liberal Party is doing, the 3 things that I can tell you about most clearly are that we are investing in infrastructure for cities like Toronto, for areas like Parkdale and Roncesvalles. And what this means is investing in transit to make your commuting time shorter. It means investing in housing so that you have a place to live that is affordable. It means investing in childcare to build childcare spots. The biggest difference between ourselves and the other parties that are contesting this election are that we are doing so even if it means running a deficit, because we believe it is time in this economy to invest in the economy to create jobs and growth. The second important thing is that we are addressing income inequality head on. And we're doing it in 2 ways. We're cutting taxes for middle income earners by asking the top 1% to pay more. And the second component of what we're doing vis-a-vis income inequality is that we are ending a system whereby you are subsidized for raising a family no matter how much you earn. That's called a universal subsidy. We think universal subsidies exacerbate income inequality, and we are trying to reduce income inequality. So we will no longer be cutting checks to people who are affluent to help them raise their kids. In terms of what we are doing for youth, we are addressing 3 key areas: youth training and education, youth jobs, and youth participation in the voting process. And as the course of the evening goes on, I'll be happy to flesh out exactly what we are doing on those 3 fronts. We've got 10 seconds left. I'm going to avoid the bell. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. And finally, before I hand the mic to Ms. Peggy Nash, just a quick reminder, if there are those of you Twitter fiends in this audience today, if you want to tweet, whatever, hashtag to keep in mind is Ward14 NP debate. So tweet away, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is that kids do these days, go ahead. But without further ado, Ms. Peggy Nash from the NDP.
Thanks very much, Derek, and thank you to Kalsung, to the organizers of this forum, all of you for being here this evening. Give yourselves a round of applause. You care about elections. It's been a real privilege to represent this community for 2 terms now. I've lived here most of my adult life, raised our kids here, and I have committed not only to strong representation, strong service for the community. Many refugee families have been helped through my office, so we've helped so many community members. But I've also worked with the community. For example, when Kalsung came to me with a group of students who wanted to make a difference in terms of a smoke-free environment, I took their petitions, spoke about it in Ottawa, and that's the kind of representation I provide. I've taken your concerns about safe cycling to create the first cycling infrastructure bill. I've taken your concerns about protecting our Humber River that the federal government cut the environmental regs for, and we've introduced a bill to protect the Humber River. My background is as a labor negotiator, but I first got active around international human rights issues. As a student, I was active in helping settle refugees from Latin America, and more recently, here in Parkdale, I held a forum on refugee health benefits when the Conservative government cut those benefits and left so many refugees, especially from the Roma community, frozen out of health care. So I've worked with people in the community. I have fought for you in Ottawa. And let me tell you a bit about what the NDP's platform is. Actually, let me compare it to Mr. Harper. With Mr. Harper, we see double youth unemployment, over 13%, more than 300,000 Canadians unemployed now than before the recession. We are committed to youth employment, to creating apprenticeships, to creating job opportunities both with NGOs and in the private sector to help young people get the jobs they've trained for, get the training they need in order to get ahead in this economy. We've committed to infrastructure investment, not just cycling, but to transit, to housing, to working with First Nations to make sure no one in this country goes without potable water. We've committed to repeal the terrible Bill C-51. We voted against it. We will repeal it. We will be strong defenders of human rights. And our caucus reflects this community. We've got the biggest number of women and the biggest number of young people ever in the history of Ottawa. Let's keep that happening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Nash. So now we begin with the questions. And the way this breaks down is I'll ask the question, and there will be some questions from the youth themselves, and we will direct them to specific candidates. The candidate will have about 90 seconds to respond to the question, and then we'll open it up to other candidates for them to jump in, offer their points, rebuttals, whatever the case may be. Each question will have about 5 minutes, and then we move on to the next issue. All right, and I'll ask the first question. So as we know, post-secondary education is getting more and more expensive every year, and subsequently less accessible for many high school graduates. Mr. Virani, what will you and your party do to correct this course to allow more people the opportunity to enter post-secondary education and also create a more accessible and equitable education overall?
Thank you. So the Liberal Party is committed to ensuring, as I mentioned at the outset, education and training as a key facet in terms of addressing what is rightly pointed out by Ms. Nash as a problem in terms of youth employment. What we are planning to do is trying to ensure that all facets of post-secondary education are accessible. So that means everything from a skilled trades program and apprenticeships through a college programs all the way right through university. I'm personally quite appalled. My own practices as a lawyer, when I studied law, it would cost $3,800 per year at University of Toronto's Law School. It now costs $28,000 at University of Toronto's Law School. That is absolutely appalling in terms of the accessibility issues that it reveals, because what it does, it prevents people from getting in on the front end. It also circumscribes their options on the back end. So people can't pursue the type of clinic law, poverty law work at the clinic that I helped to create, for example. They need to be forced into areas such as working on Bay Street or on Wall Street. What the Liberal Party is committed to doing is ensuring that universities, colleges, and skilled trades programs are accessible, that there are loan forgiveness programs that are put into place, that there are mechanisms for financial aid that make these opportunities viable for individuals, and that the complementary piece is that we're ensuring to create better prospects for employment after the fact so that people are able to pay back some of those significant loans that they are taking on, which prevent them from further participating in the current economy, whether that's renting an apartment, buying a car, purchasing their first home, etc. It's a very, very important facet, and it's one that I feel incumbent upon to address in terms of the needs of this community. Thank you.
Okay, so if you guys want to jump in,
I'm happy to start. How many seconds do we have?
we have 3 minutes. Yeah.
Let me just say that I'm the first person in my family to have the opportunity to go to university, so I know how important accessibility is, and far too many young people today are denied accessibility or they're burdened with mortgage-style debts. It's completely unacceptable. One of the things that propelled me to get involved in politics was actually before the Conservative government, under the government of Jean Chrétien, seeing the massive social spending cuts, the austerity cuts to balance the books. That hurt post-secondary education. We have the highest tuition fees in the country right here. It hurt healthcare. It canceled our national housing strategy. And that propelled me to want to not just believe what people say, but to see what they do. I want to be in politics to make sure that post-secondary education is affordable, but if students need to have debt, that they don't have crushing interest rates and collection agencies going after them to pay it back when they can't even find a job. We need to stop the war on scientists and help young people get into the workplace.
Adam, if you want to chip in?
Sure. So let me tell you our proposal for the for students. So basically, our position and my position is that education should not be a commodity that the government sells to you as an individual. Essentially, education should be an inherent right that every Canadian should have access to, including post-secondary. So our plan would be to essentially cap all student loans at $10,000, and then going forward by 2020 implement a policy where we abolish all tuition fees. So essentially what that means is that post-secondary education becomes on par with elementary and high school education in that it's something that the state provides for the individuals, assuming that in doing so, we essentially empower an entire generation of people, which allows Canada to be stronger on the international marketplace and domestically. So our plan would be no tuition fees by 2020.
Is that all?
Well, let me just ask the question. I think that's very appealing. Germany has that system. But Germany has a different accessibility issue, which is that not everybody can get to post-secondary. There are obviously tests to get in, and what I love about their system is they have a huge apprenticeship program, and we are committed to creating apprenticeship programs at every federal, provincial, and municipal infrastructure program offer apprenticeships to youth so that youth have job opportunities with public money that's spent. So that's a good thing, but it means their universality of payment means people get streamed into different sectors. And I'm just wondering how the Green Party would approach that.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by being forced into different sectors. you're implying that in Germany, you're depending on your skills testing, you're forced into a certain stream.
It's my understanding that people are streamed fairly early in high school as to whether they're going to be in post-secondary, like university, whether they're going to be in an apprenticeship. And, you know, I think there's a lot of good things about that system. I'm just wondering, is it unlimited? Is the university proposal from the Greens an unlimited proposal in terms of as many people who want to go to university will all be free?
Yeah, that is the proposal. Now, obviously, it's a phase-in process, so it doesn't happen immediately. Immediately, we would cap all student loans at $10,000. No student debt will exceed $10,000 immediately. All student loans going forward would immediately be interest-free, and then by the course of 2020, those fees would come down to the point where all education is free. Now, in terms of streamlining, I'm not sure that there's a strong argument to be made that would have to happen in Canada. There's certainly lots of incentivization programs that can be implemented to encourage youth into certain streams. If say, we have a dearth of plumbers in a certain sector of the country, then certainly we would incentivize people to go into plumbing in those sections of the country because that's what's most needed there. But I don't know that there's any benefit to enforcing people into a certain stream based on high school testing grade 9 or 10. I'm not sure that's the best approach.
If I could just raise 2 points. One is just in response to Ms. Nash and the comments about austerity. Clearly, austerity actually has a detrimental impact in terms of your ability to support things like post-secondary education or apprenticeship and training programs. But I would just reiterate for the audience that there are two parties, out of the three major parties, there are two that are talking right now about austerity and pursuing the path of balanced budgets. Those are the Conservative Party of Canada and the New Democratic Party of Canada. The Liberal Party of Canada is not talking about austerity, far from it. We're talking about investing in the economy to pursue a path of jobs and growth.
But we're talking about investing in the economy.
If I could finish, Peggy, if that includes running a deficit of including up to $10 billion per year in the first 2 years and $4 billion per year in the third year of a 4-year mandate. It's exactly the type of actual deficit financing and stimulus that Ms. Nash lauded as finance critic, and I find it a bit of a juxtaposition for her now to be taking the position as her party is taking. I presume it's an uncomfortable position, Ms. Nash.
No, absolutely not. Let me just say there's nothing inherently progressive about deficits. The Conservatives have run 7 deficit budgets. No one would argue that they are progressive. What is progressive is forcing very profitable, large corporations to pay just a little bit more so that we can take that money and invest it in creating the first new social program in a generation, which is childcare, and investing in healthcare and many other programs. I would argue that it's a bit of smoke and mirrors on the part of the Liberal Party, and frankly, to have Paul Martin, the king of austerity, campaigning with Justin Trudeau. If I were Justin Trudeau, I would run 100 miles from Paul Martin because of his legacy.
Okay. Now, sorry, we have to move on. In the lead up to this debate, we had, like I said, we had the voting pop-up session with the youth and some of the other participants who, cast ballots and whatnot. We also had a series of workshops preceding that, even weeks before, where youth members learned about the whole election systems, and through the course of that, we identified some youth who felt very passionately about an issue, and they would like to ask those questions to the candidates. But unfortunately, the youth who prepared these questions were not able to attend in person. So we've some of the youth who are here have volunteered to ask on their behalf. And this question first goes to Ms. Peggy Nash, and it will be.
Oh, Tashi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tashi. So basically, I'm asking this question on behalf of Jitsun Love. So she wrote, some of the youth nowadays grow up angry, aimless. We witness crime, violent crime, committed by youth in my neighborhood. These kids seem to be disengaged. What can be done to prevent alienation and low self-esteem for young, marginalized people, many of which I see in my Tibetan community?
Thank you, Tashi.
Very important question. Thank you. There's a whole bunch of things involved here. I mean, we've talked a bit about jobs. I think jobs certainly being able to earn a decent income gives people hope that they can live a better life. Seeing their parents earn enough money to support their family gives people hope for a better life. So certainly our plan to grow the economy, to invest in infrastructure and housing, I think are important elements of that. Also having a decent place to live and enough food to eat. And that's why we're investing in housing. Again, under the Chrétien years, we lost our national housing strategy. We will invest in affordable housing, including subsidized and co-op housing. We are also investing in youth mental health, because I think that for young people, often there are undiagnosed mental health issues, and I think having access to mental health resources is incredibly important. So we're going to invest in that. Again, there are many causes. We have a food strategy. You know, a hungry person is an angry person. So I think that's part of it. Also, settlement issues. Newcomers come, there are huge cultural adjustment issues, and I think we more in helping young people make that culture.
Puts into place the housing first principle, which essentially immediately gets people around the world, and actually in medicine happening in Canada, they've been doing it for the past few years, terribly successful. We have a bunch of youth initiatives to get young people directly out of college.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Great. Okay, so this next question is for Adam. Climate change is an issue that's front and center. Oil sands, we've got melting polar ice in the polar ice sheets of the North Pole. Everything is getting more intense. From a Canadian perspective, and you know what. The Department of Fisheries and Ocean, we've scaled ice in our land and our forests. So we would re-implement all of those. I would also add that we stand against all oil exports by rail and to our coasts. We oppose the Kinder Morgan pipeline, the Keystone pipeline, and the Energy East pipeline. We would arrest the growth in oil sands protections. We would repeal the $1 billion in subsidies we give to fossil fuel companies. There's absolutely no reason why some of the most profitable companies in the world should be getting government handouts to continue their dirty work. As well, one of the most important things I think coming up is COP21, which is the United Nations Summit. Excited to be a leader at that summit and has been up until now.
I've received a couple of awards from the Sierra Club for my work on climate change, who quit a cabinet post to put his party on a point of principle to defend a public park. On pipelines, unlike the Conservatives and the Liberals, we oppose Keystone XL, the pipeline through the US, and we have said there is no credible process today for assessing pipelines. Therefore, we cannot approve pipelines. What someone suggested to me, jokingly maybe, was maybe we should bring in an omnibus bill to reverse everything that Conservatives did. We want to change conference in Paris, country, to the oil and gas sector, and restore our international.
Stand behind. It's a plan that's been backed by Pembina and Ecoterra. It relates to putting a price on carbon around the country. not pursue the environment and the economy at the same time. You can, but it's called by technology. And what we would be doing to stimulate jobs, to stimulate self-esteem, and to stimulate the economy is investing in biofuel, solar, wind, and lo and behold, even tidal energy. The last time we checked, the largest tides on the planet. Thank you.
Well,
air, we all drink the water, we all live in this country. Young people, I think, have a key role to play in creating a cleaner environment for the future. Approach and very exciting, energizing approach that links social justice, the environment, and the economy. We need to combine all three for the future. Thank you.
thank you. We'll move on. Just a quick reminder for those of you who are tweeting about this event, this debate is live. So if you want Tiny CC, Tiny, what is it, Gijin? I'm going to shout it out.
It's tiny.cc
Tiny.cc slash
Ward
War 14 MP debate.
Yeah, that's right.
Pretty simple. So if you want to tweet that, for those of your colleagues or friends who are not able to make it in person, they can view or hear the debate through that medium. All right, let's move on. I just wanted to give a little bit more time to climate change because that's a big, huge issue. I think, but this next topic is also very important. I mean, I don't want to downplay any of the other topics, but this one's especially so. And this one's directed to Arif. So earlier this year, the Harper government, and we did touch on this in your opening remarks. One of you guys did. I forget which one. But this is about the, earlier this year, the Harper government introduced and passed the Anti-Terrorism Act, aka Bill C-51, with support from your Liberal Party. Under the stated objectives of preventing acts of terrorism in Canada, this law would expand the scope of agencies like CSIS and redefine major aspects of the Criminal Code and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act of Canada. So this law affects all of us. It has been heavily criticized by legal scholars, political activists, First Nations leaders, to name just a few, who say that this will curtail the rights and freedoms of many Canadians and allow agencies like CSIS to target specific groups and individuals when they couldn't or it was more difficult in the past. If you were elected, how would you continue to support this law?
So the answer is, if I was elected, I wouldn't be supporting this law, and the Liberal Party doesn't support this law. And what I mean by that is that the Liberal Party support of C-51 in terms of the vote was not unqualified. So let me start by a couple of prefatory. I have 90 seconds, just to be clear. Yes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, excellent. I've got 2 minutes. So first of all, there's been a lot of fear-mongering about this legislation, right? There's people on the right side of the spectrum that are saying there's a jihadi terrorist under every rock. There are people on the left side of the spectrum that are saying there's a spy in every wall. Neither is correct. We need to have a ratcheted down discussion, a level-headed debate about the difference between civil liberties and security interests and how we balance the two. Second component is that I'm a human rights and constitutional lawyer. I understand the Charter and I understand civil liberties. It's what I litigate for a living. Third point is that I'm a Muslim man. As a Muslim man in this room, I've got a lot more at stake than perhaps 90% of the people here in terms of increased surveillance of my own community. Let's talk about the Liberal Party's position on C-51. We participated in the amendment process, unlike all of the other parties, and actually improved the bill somewhat. Not a great deal, but somewhat, in terms of limiting the amount of organizations that can share information, in terms of protecting civil disobedience protesters. The word lawful was removed so that all protesters are now exempt from the veil of surveillance. Is that enough? Certainly not. Is the bill flawed? Absolutely, the bill is flawed. Would we amend it the second we come into government? 150% we would amend it. We would have a role for the Information and Privacy Commissioner to play in terms of vetting information. That role was voted down by Stephen Harper and Tom O'Carroll. We would implement a sunset clause so that it expires after 3 years. That again was voted down by Tom Mulcair and Stephen Harper. We would have a role whereby there is parliamentary oversight by a multi-party group of elected legislators to vet the information that is being shared. Is this bill perfect? It by no means is. In terms of what I would be doing as your member of parliament, I would be representing your views going forward. What we need to have is a frank discussion about actually how senseless acts of violence are caused. There's usually an element of mental wellness that is at stake when you talk about senseless acts of violence. If we focus our direction on supporting the mental health system and the resources therein, we'd go a lot further in terms of keeping Canadians safe. Thank you.
Well, I would argue that it's not fear-mongering to stand up for human rights and to speak out against Bill C-51, and I've been very proud to do that for years. I've spoken out in public rallies here in our city. I spoke out in the House of Commons against it, and frankly, I don't understand the Liberal Party that said they were opposed to it and then voted for it. I don't get that. I think that the reason we voted against amendments is there was no amending this bill. Nothing would make it an acceptable bill. We agree with 4 former prime ministers, 100 senior legal minds, and every privacy commissioner in this country. Environmentalists understand that when conservatives call them eco-terrorists, they know what that means. When First Nations are called radicals, they know what that means. When working people are called radicals, they know what that means. There's no fixing this bill. Of course, government has to keep us safe. It's a basic role of government, but you can't trade off our rights in doing so. I want to support Louise Arbour on this, the former head of the UN Human Rights Commission, who is campaigning for the NDP and is strongly opposed to this law. And that's it. I'm going to leave you time. Thanks.
I actually have a question to Mr. Virani, and I don't want to be, don't want to get bogged down by hypothetical questions. But suppose you were a sitting MP, when Justin Trudeau supported this bill, would you have voted for it?
Yes, that's a great question. It was asked to me a week ago in Swansea, and what I would have done, and Justin Trudeau indicated it was an open vote for our caucus. I would have consulted the people here in this room, the people here in this riding. I would have listened to the analysis by many of those legal experts with whom I've litigated cases with. I would have then consulted the people that are a part of my core team, and I would have made a decision and voted according to my conscience. It would have been a decision that based on exactly all of the information that I heard. And I just want to point out something in terms of Ms. Nash's comments, that it is not exactly accurate to indicate that you were not participating in the process, Ms. Nash, when the NDP caucus proposed 40 amendments to this bill at the committee stage.
Yeah, which would have gutted the bill and completely rewritten it. That's what we wanted, was to get rid of this bill and have something entirely new that actually dealt with the radicalization of youth, because there is absolutely nothing in this bill that deals with the radicalization of youth, and nothing that actually keeps us safer. It is just a massive invasion of privacy. And I do want to point out every Liberal voted in support of Bill C-51, and I shake my head, I don't get it.
But it's an excellent point in terms of dealing with the radicalization of youth and radical youth forums. It's a very, very important point. What I stand behind is a party that doesn't vilify or ostracize an entire religion. And again, I'm speaking about my religion. So you should take some solace from the fact that when the October 16th attacks occurred on Parliament Hill, the only leader that reached out to the entire Islamic community, the Canadian Arab Federation, to find out whether they were subject to reprisals or whether we could be working with them in an effort to de-radicalize young Muslim men, is the Liberal Party, and that's Justin Trudeau.
I did reach out to the mosques in our neighborhood, and Tom Mulcair has reached out to the Muslim community, meets with them regularly, and they are furious about Bill C-51.
While we're on topic, can I ask a little bit, keep it down a little bit, we're trying to get along, and I do appreciate the enthusiasm, keep it up. This is a topic that's very dear to me, and I have a lot of friends who are very passionate about it. And on the topic of leaders, for instance, there was the Women Against Violence debate a couple of days ago, and your leader Justin Trudeau made a few comments that some people were not very excited about. especially as it's talked about certain communities that were less likely to take care of their kids, or certain forms of music that were lend itself to more misogynistic actions and whatnot. So when you speak about not wanting to vilify people in certain communities and whatnot, how do you reconcile that kind of mindset with what you just heard from Justin Trudeau?
So you're referring to women in particular on this issue?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just be crystal clear in terms of the Liberal Party's position on women and in terms of Justin Trudeau's participation on this issue. So let's think back to what was meant to happen it was meant to happen this week. It was meant to be a national debate on women's issues. Justin Trudeau agreed to participate in that debate, Elizabeth May agreed to participate in that debate. Stephen Harper did it, no big surprise there, but there was a big surprise when Tom Mulcair bowed out of that debate and denied a national forum for the first time in 31 years on these very compelling issues. That one decision prompted us to hold our own town hall discussion in this riding on women's issues. The Liberal Party is also committed to a gender equal cabinet. First time in Canadian history that would ever be seen. We're committed to having a gender analysis of all political issues that are being decided by a Liberal Party cabinet, Liberal Party caucus. So in terms of sort of supporting women's issues, there's also a component in terms of supporting better and more flexible maternity leave and better, more and flexible compassionate leave, as well as flexible working conditions for anyone who's involved in the federal
Thank you.
service.
We're going to quickly wrap up, but I just wanted Ms. Nash to respond to, especially the question of why Mr. Mulcair didn't attend that debate.
Well, first of all, Gillick, in response to your question, stereotyping of entire communities is never acceptable, whether it's intentional or unintentional. It is never acceptable. Let me just say, our leader is, after 4 elections of Liberals promising childcare and the Conservatives promising in one election, we're actually going to get it done. We're going to bring in a national childcare program. We've committed to holding an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women within the first 100 days of taking office, and we've committed to a national action plan on violence against women. Our leader's rationale was, we're fighting to replace Stephen Harper, and that we had committed long before there was a women's debate that we would go to all debates that Stephen Harper was present at. But failing that, there was a debate in Toronto. All leaders had the chance to give a statement, and there was a robust discussion at that time. Check the record. We have 43% of our candidates who are women. We have the largest number of women in our caucus in the history of Canada. We are determined to make gender equality a national priority, and when we're in government, we're going to do that.
Thank you. Moving on, but before I do so, I just want to give quick props to Children for being so awesome, for all the changing time limits that we have. It's a jazz improvisation, right? So we're just going to keep on rolling with the punches. But okay, so the next question actually is, again, to Mr. Virani. Your leader, Justin Trudeau, pledged to welcome almost 25,000 Syrian refugees as they flee the turmoil in Syria. How do you intend to build on that promise and ensure also that Canada remains a leader welcoming refugees from all over the world, be they political, economic, LGBTQ, environmental migrants? And this is, I know, a question that's dear to you, personal to you, but it's also personal to me as a refugee myself and to many of the young people here.
So thank you for the question. So once again, I think is it a stretch to say if Stephen Harper was in power 43 years ago, I'm not standing on this floor right now. I came here as part of 7,000 people who were airlifted out of Kampala, Uganda, fleeing the dictatorship of Idi Amin. I came here as a baby. There was great supports in place at that time, but what was more important is that there was a humanitarian and moral compass to our immigration and refugee policy. We've lost that compass entirely. The Liberal Party has been speaking about bringing in 25,000 refugees immediately as far back as March of this year. It doesn't coincide with the timing of a young Turkish boy washing up on the shores of Turkey, a young Syrian boy. It coincides with our decision to stay out of the war in Syria and Iraq. It's an impressive decision. It's the right decision. It is just the tip of the iceberg, because we are committing to bringing in 25,000 government-sponsored individuals. So every Romero House, every Canadian Council of Refugees, every Windermere United Church that wants to privately sponsor more can bring in more on top of that number. More importantly, everything that I understand about when we came here involved Canadians actually getting on the ground and bringing people over. we're committing $100 million to Canadian Citizenship and Immigration Canada to put staff on the ground to process these claims, and another $100 million to UNHCR to help them with the processing of these claims. That provides the actual dollars behind the political will that is sorely lacking. Where there's a will, there's a way. What we need to do is have planes and staff on the ground in Turkey, in Greece, in Hungary, to actually process people and bring them to this country. Again, it is only the tip of the iceberg, but it is a hallmark of the country that we once were and the country that we need to become. I firmly believe not only in the humanitarian component, including some of the references that were made to providing medical care to people once they arrive, but also in the potential of immigrants. People who arrive here work bloody hard, they get educated, they go to university, they become people that are involved in their communities. One day they might even run for office. I'm proof positive of that narrative. That narrative is missing in this country right now. It's missing in the city, and we need to restore it.
I agree with a lot of the things Mr. Varani said. I think our position would be to completely overhaul our immigration system, to make it, to basically reposition Canada as a compassionate and welcoming country that we used to be up until quite recently. As well, we repealed Bill C-24, which establishes multiple tiers of citizenship for Canadians, which is, I think we'd all agree, is pretty terrible. As well, I'd like to, one of the things that has been talked about recently is the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and that's another thing that we'd really like to reinvestigate because it really doesn't actually provide any real means to gain citizenship to Canada. What it really just does is costs Canadian jobs and essentially allows foreign workers to come work in fairly impoverished conditions. I've worked with many of them in cornfields and soybean fields as a teenager. They live in pretty deplorable conditions, and then they're sort of, as they get closer to the opportunity to gain citizenship, we pull it away from them, and then they're forced to go back to where they came from. So those three things I think are fundamental, but most importantly, we really need to reimagine our relationship with the world's refugees and return ourselves to that country of compassion and welcoming that Canada has always been known for.
Peggy?
I think we may have a violent agreement on this issue. You know, except for Indigenous people, we're all newcomers to this country. I've had the privilege of working with refugees, going back, as I said, to Latin American refugees, but Tibetan refugees, Roma refugees, and many others. And we have lost our sense of compassion. We've lost our moral compass on this issue. Clearly, on Syria, we've said similarly, we need to get people on the ground where the refugees are in Syria, in Turkey. These border countries are taking massively disproportionate numbers of refugees, and they are least equipped to be able to help them. So we need to give humanitarian aid because we have a humanitarian disaster happening here. We've called for an immediate 10,000 refugees to come to Canada. If anybody's worried about security, they all have security checks, so the Conservatives are trying to fearmonger on this. The UN is asking us to take an additional 9,000 a year. We obviously support that. We support having an ombudsman to marshal our resources of the government and to help get through the roadblocks and barriers that are being thrown in the way of refugees. Also, we support unlimited private sponsorship refugees. And let me just say, you know, I've worked very closely with Windermere United Church that was housing the Pazuma family, a Roma family that was in refuge for 2 years with a lawyer who was convicted of fraud at the Law Society. I spoke on this many times in the House. I went to the minister many times. They were brutally intransigent, and the Pazuma family ultimately got deported, and I believe they should have not been deported. So we need to restore fairness in our immigration policy, and if you're good enough to come here and work temporarily, by God, you're good enough to stay here and bring your family.
Thank you. Before we move to the next question, I just want to throw this out to all three candidates, and it's a question that I personally am curious about, and it is the sense that this the plight of the Syrian refugees took on this a whole new dynamic once those horrific pictures of those babies, of that drowned baby was published. And so my question is, why does it take something as horrific as that kind of image to galvanize the political leaders into making all kinds of statements regarding asylum to refugees as for people outside of Canada.
No, thank you, Gulek. I mean, I think it's sad that that's what it requires. I mean, the cliche is that a picture is worth 1,000 words, but I would just reiterate the fact that our commitment to bring in 25,000 refugees dates back to March. It's much prior to a picture of Elan Kurdi. Did that strike me? Of course it struck me. It struck everyone in this room. I'm a father of a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. It made me actually catch my throat and sort of pause in my living room when I saw the picture that they were describing on the radio 30 minutes earlier. But what I think is also important when we're talking about galvanizing political leadership, it's also teasing out the details of what's actually been going on. Because if you go back to December, and I think this is a point that needs to be underscored, it's not just that the limited amounts of people that Stephen Harper is willing to accept, he's actually cherry-picking what religions are allowed to come in. Because what he has said is that we are willing to accept 10,000 people over an extended period of time, but it's based on religious minorities. That's code for Yazidi, Druze, Christian, and people of the Jewish faith who are living in Syria. That means if you are a Sunni Muslim majority, you're not welcome in this country. That is a disgusting and specious statement entering into religious discrimination in the midst of our immigration and refugee policy. It's never been done before and should never be repeated. It needs to be stopped immediately.
I'll be brief. I mean, I think that, it's numbers don't always tell the story. Numbers don't seem to impact with people, but the image of a dead child, I mean, I'm a parent of 3 kids, we all know children. No one cannot be affected by that. But to be fair, I think the opposition parties, I know our party has been raising the issue of refugees, Syrian refugees, for many, many months now. We've been grilling Chris Alexander, the immigration minister, and he's been willfully fudging the numbers, confusing private sponsorships, confusing countries, and he has the audacity to say that Canada's been taking a greater number of refugees than any other country in the world. Give your head a shake. So, clearly we need a new approach, but it just says that for the community, for youth, for activists, a picture telling a story changes people's minds, and it does it much more quickly than dry statistics.
Adam.
Yeah, I would agree with Ms. Nash. I think, Elizabeth May as well has been talking for months about pushing the minister for movement on the Syrian refugee issue, and obviously met with the same blockades. But more importantly, I think, to the topic of why that picture matters, I think why it takes a picture like that to move our political leadership is because that's what moves you guys. And so it's when pictures like that come up, you guys get moved, and you guys start being vocal and saying, what the hell is going on here? Why aren't we doing something about this? And that's when the leadership listens. So they are listening to you, but you have to be loud enough for them to pay attention. And so I think a picture like that is what galvanizes people and gets people talking about it.
Even Stephen Harper. My God, I don't know if there's a heart in there. Maybe somebody with a heart told him he needed to react to that. Maybe that's what happened.
I think so.
Thank you. For this next question, I'm going to invite Latushin over, again, one of our awesome youth members, and he's going to ask a question to the candidate. This one actually is directed to Ms. Peggy Nash.
Hi, my name is Latushin, and I'm asking this question on behalf of Javon, since he's absent today. So the question is, why is Parkdale an area that does not have enough affordable housing for low-income families living in this area?
Thank you, Latushin.
Really crucial question, and as was said earlier, housing first. If you don't have a roof over your head, it's hard to think about much else. I think it's frankly shameful that we have stopped building affordable housing. As I said before Stephen Harper, the National Housing Strategy was cancelled. And I mean, I have to say, I've seen whole families living in bachelor apartments. I've seen infested, moldy buildings that no person, let alone a child, should be living in. It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. And to say, well, the market will bring the solution here. Clearly, the market hasn't brought the solution. What the market is doing is kicking people out of affordable housing and forcing them to go to the landlord-tenant board, I should call it the landlord board, to try to keep a roof over their head. I've worked with the community, fighting rent increases, fighting evictions, fighting Achilles. But let me just say that Tom Mulcair and the New Democratic Party will reintroduce a housing first strategy, a national affordable housing strategy, a national housing strategy. We will invest in co-op housing. I've lived in co-ops. They're a great form of housing. People work together in order to maintain and manage their housing. But we also need social housing. You know, if someone has a struggle with mental health or addiction, the last thing they need is to be out on the street or fall victim to a usurious landlord. So we will build affordable housing. We're going to put a lot of young people to work doing it, and we're going to build it as energy efficiently as possible so that it's good housing stock that people deserve to live in.
The issue of affordable housing is critical. It's the second time, obviously, it's come up in this debate. But I need to emphasize this again and again, that if you're concerned about infrastructure, including social infrastructure, if you're concerned about the ability to have affordable housing in this part of the city and in all cities in this country, you need to look closely at the Liberal Party's plan to invest in infrastructure. It is very ambitious. It is the biggest infrastructure bill in the history of this country. It is $65 billion on top of what has already been committed. It includes $20 billion with a B to be dedicated to social infrastructure, which means housing and childcare spaces. And what that means is everything that relates to supportive housing for people who are ill or disabled or seniors or women fleeing violence. It includes rent-geared to income housing and affordable housing in terms of co-op agreements being renewed. It also includes the ability to purchase housing with reduced requirements for your first down payment and relaxed rules from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Cooperation. It is a fundamentally different plan. It is immediately implementable, and the way we can do it is because we are not committed to following the orthodoxy of balancing the budget. That's been a tried plan by Stephen Harper, who's been alluded to many times. It puzzles me that Tom Mulcair is planning to pursue the exact same path, because in order to do that, you cannot make the infrastructure investments that we need in this city and in this country, including in affordable housing for Parkdale. Thank you.
Peggy, you were shaking your head there?
Well,
go ahead, yeah.
I just, I was referenced in this, but let me just say again, if deficit budgets were progressive, my goodness, Stephen Harper's had 7 of them. Let me just say, the Liberals are afraid to ask big corporations to pay a little bit more so that we can invest in infrastructure, we can invest in housing, we can make the next generation of improvements to healthcare. We should challenge the Liberal Party on that. And, Liberals sound very progressive when they're campaigning, but that's what got me running for office, was breaking those promises. The provincial Liberal leader sounded progressive, and now she's privatizing our hydro. So my question is, what are you folks going to privatize? What are you going to privatize when you supposedly invest in infrastructure? Because I've not heard anybody talking about that. Are you going to use our pension money for infrastructure? Because nobody's talking about that either.
Peggy, it's very, very clear that we've got a difference of opinion on this issue, but it's a difference in policy that's important. So just to make it clear as mud, we've got people that want to generate revenue. We're generating revenue by increasing taxes on individual people. The NDP is proposing to generate revenue by increasing taxes on corporations. Corporations, when taxes go up, they either avoid their taxes because they pay really useful lawyers called tax lawyers to help them avoid it, or they pack up shop and they move, killing jobs in this country. That's what happens with the NDP plan. That's why we're not pursuing it. We don't think it's fair, it's unfair to have the top 1% of earners in this country taxed a little bit more so that you can pay a little bit less. That's called reducing income inequality. It's an equity-seeking agenda that most progressives in this city, in this area, in this country would back. We also don't believe, if I'll finish, Peggy, in subsidizing people who are having children, even if they are earning a 7-digit salary. That's called a universal child care benefit that I alluded to earlier. When you do that, you're
exacerbating used to support it, you voted for it.
In fact, Peggy, if we're going to enter into the leaders, Justin Trudeau, when he got that check that Stephen Harper sent to me and to Justin, he gave it to a women's shelter. Tom Mulcair asked NDP supporters to mail it to him to fund his campaign. That's all you need to know about the leadership at the top level. in terms of where their
The
priorities are.
universal
Thank you.
child care benefit is fully taxable. It's taxable, so people at the top end, in fact, don't get it. And let me just say, our plan is to tax CEO stock options, those very, like the guy who's privatizing Ontario Hydro and is going to make $4.6 million. They're taxed at half what everybody else is taxed for income. We're going to make $500 million through taxing them at the full rate, and we're going to invest that in taking kids out of poverty.
Thank you, thank you. And Adam,
Yeah, I'll be quick. I want to throw a couple of things out there. I think what you're talking about is trickle-down economics, and it fundamentally doesn't work. That's been shown. All the banks, we give all these corporations billions and hundreds of billions of dollars in tax incentives and tax breaks, and they put it in their bank accounts and they collect interest on it. They haven't pumped any of it back into the Canadian economy. It's called dead money. There's over $600 billion of it sitting in bank accounts, not being done anything with. With regards to the housing thing, of course the Greens have a national housing strategy. We have a national infrastructure strategy. We have a national senior strategy, part of which deals with housing for seniors and accessibility for seniors. But really what I wanted to touch base on was one of the things I think that the Green Party, one of the most interesting ideas that I think deals with local housing issues is the Council of Canadian Governments. So what that does is, in a place like Parkdale High Park right now, and actually in the west end of Toronto in general, there's major infrastructure failings. So a lot of our public buildings are falling apart. The City of Toronto has pledged their third of income to bring those buildings up to standard. The province has not, and the federal government has not. And the city is essentially waiting for those commitments from the feds and from the provincial government. The problem is they're not all sitting at the same table having the same conversation, so it's very difficult to get agreements. The Council of Canadian Governments that the Greens propose essentially is a government that's made up of federal governments, provincial governments, municipal and local governments, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. They all sit together at the same table discussing critical issues. And those issues get dealt with at the municipal level. So an issue like this for local housing, where you need federal infrastructure money, you need provincial infrastructure money, all of that can be dealt with when these parties are all when these leaders are all sitting down at the same table having a conversation on equal footing with one another, rather than sort of doing it the way we've been doing it, which is very unilateral and not obviously effective.
Thank you. We're just going to move on and just approach it to the candidates. If you do want to catch my attention, I just noticed you have to register a very severe supreme annoyance. If you shake your head, I'll catch it and they'll be like, hey, what's going on, okay? Just kidding. I'm just kidding. This question is for Adam. This past summer, the Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission released a report capturing in extensive detail the tragic and horrific history of the residential school program of Canada. The report also contained many recommendations on how Canada can improve its treatment of and in recognition of Indigenous people and the many different treaties that were signed. What will you, as an MP, pledge towards recognizing the rights of the First Nations people of Canada to flourish and determine their success? If you can, please speak on how you will work with Aboriginal youth as it pertains to their education, language, and success.
Okay, another long one. Yes.
You get the easy ones, yes.
That's great. Yeah, obviously my position would be to fully implement the Truth and Reconciliation Committee findings. I think globally, Canada really has a black mark on its reputation with regards to the way we've treated our First Nations, Indigenous, and Métis, or First Nations, Inuit, and Métis populations. Obviously, one of the first things we would do as well is to establish that Council of Canadian Governments, which sort of allows leaders from all sectors to come together on equal footing. I would also work very hard to implement, well, basically one of the things we'd like to do is to pull back and essentially abolish, if possible, the Indian Act. It's pretty terrible. It doesn't really benefit First Nations peoples at all. And what we would do is we would like to renegotiate all the terms of the treaties and renegotiate our nation-to-nation relationship on equal footing in good faith. As well, we'd like to implement immediately an inquiry into the missing and murdered Aboriginal women so that we can end the sort of systemic violence that happens on reservations. And finally, one of the most important things I think would be to, with regards to education, as you mentioned, is removing that 2% cap on First Nations education. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but basically the government says that education funding increases to reservation schools cannot exceed more than 2% per year, regardless of population growth or language needs or any of that. It doesn't matter. It just straight up says we're capping it at 2%. So that's obviously a fundamental thing where a small thing like that, it seems like a rather insignificant detail, but a detail like that, and pulling that back would make an absolutely huge difference on First Nations communities where they're facing tough issues with education, especially protecting their language, protecting their culture. It's difficult to do that when we're telling them how much money they're allowed to spend to do that. So,
Indigenous youth is the fastest growing demographic in the country. And the 2% cap, which is brought in under the Chrétien years, has been incredibly damaging. We would pass a bill that was put forward by the NDP called Shannon's Dream that would treat First Nations schools equally in terms of funding with the schools that kids in the rest of Canada have. So they would get equal funding, pretty basic. One of our MPs, Romeo Saganash, actually worked on the UN Charter for Indigenous people. We would adopt that, we would ratify that, and as part of our meeting with the Council of the Federations, in other words, the provincial and territorial governments, we would meet nation to nation with First Nations. We would get rid of the Indian Act and meet nation to nation. As I said, we would call an immediate inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We will sit down nation to nation and go through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. Tom was there the day of the report, and frankly, it was one of the most embarrassing days I've ever spent as a parliamentarian, seeing, first of all, our Prime Minister absent from the report presentation, the Minister of Aboriginal of Indian Affairs basically sitting in his place, no response, and the Prime Minister really resisting and challenging any action when it comes to First Nations. And the way they changed the Election Act, my guess is they actually don't want First Nations to vote. So you should vote, First Nations to vote, so we can turf this guy.
I'll take the same amount of time as I just took. The Liberal Party position is that I Don't Know More should not exist. Let's just cut right to the chase. I Don't Know More exists because we had something called the Kelowna Accord, struck by Paul Martin, where you had a nation-to-nation agreement, where you had the Government of Canada working with First Nations governments on a consensual and respectful basis. It completely evaporated when that government was voted out of office, and now you've got a movement where people feel that they need their voices to be heard, and they're taking to the streets in order to do so. We would restore the Kelowna Accord so you have that nation-to-nation relationship. We would immediately implement the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry. We would adopt all of the TRC recommendations, a fundamental departure point between ourselves and the NDP. Mr. Mulcair has not made that commitment to adopt all of the TRC recommendations. We would increase First Nations control over their own education, a fundamental point of contention that has seen relationships dissolve between Aboriginal communities and the Harper government, and we would ratify the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. So it's a robust plan. It's a plan that's far overdue.
If I could just clarify, one of the reasons we have not said, well, we'll just adopt everything, is because some of the recommendations are provincial, so it means actually sitting down with the provinces and resolving those with First Nations and provinces and territories.
Thank you. I just have a quick question before we go on to the next. There were many different treaties signed with First Nations people in the past, and a lot of them are still ongoing. Would you recognize those treaty agreements? Just putting out, just say yes or no. One.
Yes, we'll stop fighting First Nations in the court. We'll put that money into helping First Nations.
Yeah, absolutely. We honor the treaties 100%, but what we would like to do is, like I said, bury the Indian Act so that we can reevaluate some of those treaties and make sure that the language is brought up to a place where Indigenous people actually benefit from it, and we don't use it to hinder them.
Yeah, and
treaties signed by the Government of Ontario or the Government of Canada engage what's called the fiduciary duty of the Crown in order to be respectful and to be a proper administrator and protector of the rights of First Nations individuals. We would absolutely implement all of those and do what's called a Section 35 Charter analysis over all negotiations with First Nations going forward, which is very, very important.
thank you. All right. This next question is for Peggy Nash. You've worked on, many committees and groups in ensuring that there is equitable representation and participation from women and in the political halls of power, if you will, in all kinds of different ways. Gender equity is something that you've been very passionate about and you've been very active in. I was struck how when we had the Globe and Mail debate a few days ago, and you had 3 white straight men running to represent all of Canada. And you look at this room, you look at Parkdale, you look at Toronto, you look at Canada. It's a changing country, whether we mean that superficially or whether we mean that in a very deep sense. What are some of the things that you will be doing to ensure there is a more robust participation and representation of the people of Canada in the political sphere, in economic, in education, all forms of leadership?
Great question, and it's something that I've been passionate about all my life, which is more inclusionary representation. It's one of the reasons I was a founder of Equal Voice, encouraging more women to become involved as leaders and in politics. It's why I ran for the leadership of the New Democratic Party, because I thought it was about time that we had a woman. We've had 2 women leaders, but I thought it was time for another one. There's no quota. We're the only party that actually has the requirement that before having a nomination meeting, you actually have to have equity representation. I wouldn't have been nominated when I first ran if that provision wasn't there. It means that Buddy just can't put his hand up and say, well, I'm going to run. No, there has to be equity representation for the nomination. Then you have to slug it out and win the nomination. But I'm also a passionate, long-time supporter of proportional representation. It would increase the representation of the Green Party, but it would also increase the representation of a more diverse representation. I mean, we're pleased that we have the largest number of women ever elected in a caucus in the history of Parliament. We have First Nations, we have people who are from non-Caucasian background, but not nearly enough, not like this room, not like we should have. So I believe not only that we should have proportional representation. If Tom Mulcair is elected, this will be the last election with first past the post, and I believe it will lead to a fair, more democratic Parliament, a more diverse Parliament. Thank you.
I agree with Matt's point. The first past the post system has to go immediately. The Green Platform talks about implementing a proportional representation system within the first year, which means from that point on, no matter what, same idea, any election that gets called is no longer a first past the post election. As well, I think some of the things we could do is we can pull back a lot of the money that the Prime Minister's office gets, especially with regards to federal advertising. Elections Canada really should be given that money to fund initiatives to get people, especially young people, out to vote. There's been studies that have shown that young people, people under 30, are actually incredibly engaged in politics, except at the federal voting level. And when they look at why that is, it's because nobody engages you guys at the federal level until now. So that's another way that the federal government can sort of empower Elections Canada to get more people involved in the electoral process. And I just wanted to throw out that today in Canada, women get paid on average $8,000 less for doing the same work that a man does. That's something that the Green Party has in their platform to address immediately, because that's, I mean, obviously I don't think anyone up here would argue against the equity of women in the workplace. So that's something we really need to address.
It's interesting that you asked that hot on the heels of the economy debate, Gilek, because Justin Trudeau was very vocal in saying that Elizabeth May should have been at the table at that economics debate. I would again reiterate that Justin Trudeau was also willing to debate on a national level women's issues in an effort to have them discussed at the national level. We've heard this national defense of Tom Mulcair's position. I don't think it's defensible. I think if you're committed to progressive issues about inclusion at the highest levels of government, that you should be willing to debate those issues openly and in a forthright manner. What we are also committed to in terms of inclusive policies is, as I mentioned earlier, a gender equal cabinet. It has never been done before. It will be done under the Liberal Party of Canada. We're also committed to something which is a bit more broad-ranging, but ensuring that all decisions that are taken into account for a gender analysis and an analysis for minority and diverse youths. I'm very proud and happy to be a Muslim man who is a visible minority, who is coming from a refugee background, standing for the Liberal Party of Canada. There shouldn't be a minority of people like me running in the city or running in this country. We need to change that. I would echo exactly what has been talked about by my two colleagues in terms of also trying to include more diversity in terms of youth. Another thing that Justin Trudeau is committed to is having a youth advisory council. So you have Barack Obama being advised on the environment or on science by designated advisors. We would have a group of 16 to 24-year-olds actually advising Justin Trudeau on his policies as they reflect youth. We are committed 180% to reforming the electoral system. And just so people are clear on how that would work, you would have people elected first past the post, but you would have other people elected off a list. The way you put proof to your commitment to diversity is at the top of that list, you would have women, you would have members of the LGBT community, you would have visible minorities, you would have Muslims or other religious minorities. That's how you make diversity happen. It takes leadership. It's what we're committing to do as the Liberal Party of Canada. Thank you.
I would just add that one of the key problems with this election is that the Conservatives have refused to be part of our traditional debates. And it's not that those debates have been terrific, it's not that they've always been great, but they brought in massive multi-million person viewerships. And now we're having these boutique debates, and basically those who sponsor the debate get to decide who's there. That is a serious problem. We don't need to have a youth cabinet because, frankly, we have so many youth in our caucus. We have the youngest MP ever elected, but we also have, I spoke at the McGill NDP Club one time, and I said, you folks are making a bright career decision because 5 of your colleagues are now elected as members of Parliament while they were McGill students. So we have a very young caucus, and I have to say they have performed amazingly well. Lauren Liu, the youngest woman ever elected, brought in an internship bill to protect interns so they get paid, they aren't subject to sexual harassment, and they get the same rules as every other worker in the workplace.
Thank you. This next question is to Adam. And it's actually something that I'm also, again, very interested in. A lot of the chatter as we head closer to election is about vote splitting. It's about, battleground ridings and how do we ensure that, for a lot of the folks here, how do we ensure that Stephen Harper is no longer in power? And does that mean you vote, you cast a ballot where you're not fully confident in the candidate, but you do so because it's the least worst candidate that you can think of? And it's something that Peggy Nash touched on in her remarks earlier on. So my question is, how do you go past those kinds of discussions to ensure that, especially when young people who may have a lot of ideas, like very, very idealistic ideas of democracy, are then challenged by these sorts of machinations, if you will? How do you go past that?
Thanks. So let me touch on the vote splitting part first. So the thing with vote splitting is it actually doesn't really work. It doesn't matter. If you look at statistics and studies, time and time again, they'll show you that strategic voting actually doesn't really work, with the exception of literally thousands, if not tens of thousands, of people collectively voting in a specific, particular way. But at an individual level, the idea of strategic voting fails every time. So in terms of vote splitting, it's kind of a myth. So when you see the Green Party do better in a particular riding, that's because usually the vast majority of the votes come from new voters. So we go out, we actively engage people, and we get people to come out and vote who've never voted before. And that's when you see Green numbers go up. Occasionally, we do pull voters from other parties, but if you look statistically, we pull fairly equally from all 3 parties. It's not as if just NDP voters decide to vote Green one day, and the Conservatives vote Conservative and the Liberals vote Liberal. In fact, people that join the Green Party that come from other parties, we've actually seen that it's a fairly equal number across all 3 parties. So we attract Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP alike. But I will mention that the vast majority of voter increases in Green voting actually come from new voters and people who haven't voted before.
Maybe I can just...
Sorry, I just want to say one more thing. So with regards to your point about making sure that people vote their conscience and not vote for a candidate that they don't believe in, the thing is all these parties are listening to you guys. I wanted to touch on this in my closing remarks, but remember that they're all paying attention to you guys. So if you're talking about issues, if you're talking and engaging your Green or Marxist-Leninist or whatever candidate that it is that you believe in, everybody's paying attention. So the more you talk about ideas, the more you get them out there, the more you champion them, the more these other parties will capitulate and listen to what you're saying. So do that.
I want to support that. I think that I've always said at the doorstep, because people would always say to the NDP, well, you can't win here, you can't win. I would always say, vote for what you want, and you might just get it. And what we got last time was official opposition. We got 103 seats, 120 ridings, we came second place in. It's been an absolute joy to be part of the official opposition and to go toe-to-toe with Stephen Harper and John Baird and Tony Clement and Jim Flaherty. So vote for what you want, and you just might get it. I should say, it's unfortunate that Conservative hasn't come tonight, that the other candidates haven't come here. The Conservatives don't do well here, so I don't think, however you vote, you're going to have to worry about Stephen Harper getting another seat. I would argue, vote for what you want, vote for what you believe in, and you just might get it. But I do want to say, I believe we're on the brink of the first NDP government, and boy, then can we build the country of our dreams.
It's an interesting academic point, Galek, about sort of vote splitting and strategic voting, but it's absolutely clear that it's not applicable in this particular riding. We don't have a danger of a Tory sneaking up the middle. The Tory was just recently named, he's not here right now. It is pretty clear that either the Liberal Party or the NDP, with all due respect to Adam, is likely going to win in this riding. What is clear is that in the last 4 elections, you've had 2 Liberal members of Parliament and 2 NDP members of Parliament, so it has gone in 4 different ways, 4 straight times. It is clearly a seesaw riding, so you should feel confident in choosing between the Liberals and the NDP in terms of the policy platforms they're presenting, or casting your vote with whatever other party you see fit. In terms of what we need in this system is definitely a reform of the electoral system so that you can have a more reflective ballot. Until we have that proportional representation that the Liberal Party is committed to, you're choosing the best candidate, the candidate who stands behind the policies that you identify with, the leader who reflects your views. And at a youth debate, I would urge you to take a hard look at Justin Trudeau. He's a different vintage, he's a different mindset, he has a different ideology. And in terms of attracting youth voters, he's attracting youth volunteers and a ton of youth voters to boot. Thank you.
My understanding is you guys have no clear plan for proportional representation.
The plan, I think this came up at Swansea last week, but our plan is to reform first past the post within 18 months of forming office. We are not dogmatic about whether it's PR, whether it's a preferential ballot, whether it's mandatory voting or online voting. I can tell you what my personal views are. I think PR is a great system, works in most of Western Europe, but we're not dogmatic about anything other than getting rid of the first past the post model.
Okay, just a quick follow-up question, and this is just maybe a yes or no question, but some of your leaders have been quite clear about whether they would support a coalition type government. So let's start with Peggy. Would you be in favor of a coalition type government if it meant that Stephen Harper wouldn't be in power?
Yeah, we would not form a coalition with Stephen Harper. We don't vote with him, but we would. Tom Mulcair has been very clear. Our goal, we want to replace Stephen Harper, but first and foremost, we want to get rid of Stephen Harper. So we are willing to form a coalition and work with other parties to make this the last Stephen Harper government. Woo!
The Greens support a coalition government, but they don't necessarily want to be a part of it. I think they see their role, and I see their role, potentially my role, as being best suited as being a formal opposition party, a party that basically is able to work with all the other parties, but a party that must be worked with in order to facilitate any type of decision. It looks like it's going to be a fairly close election between the Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP. So in a position like that, a Green Party with even a handful of seats across the country could really sway an incredible amount of power, because every other party that wants to get things done must work with the Greens, because most likely they're not able to work with each other, which they've all consistently proven.
Thank you for that dose of pragmatism, Adam. I hope you're wrong in terms of sort of the approach. There's no person probably in this room or no party that is more keen on getting rid of Stephen Harper than myself or the Liberal Party. So be assured that Stephen Harper must go at all costs. The talk of the coalition I would just put out there that is a little bit premature. It's a discussion for October 20th. Up until now, on October 19th, what you're deciding is who you think should form government in terms of forming a majority government, or at least having the largest number of seats and being able to present a possible governing body. In terms of who would be cooperating with whom after the fact, that's a discussion for October 20th. In terms of coalition governments, do they work? Do they work well? You're damn straight they work well. Europe is replete with coalition governments, and they're great at keeping dictators like Stephen Harper out of power.
But that is why it's important to talk about, because, like you said, the government doesn't necessarily get formed by whoever gets the most seats in the House. It's not how it works. So the idea that a government could be formed by an opposition that is made up of a majority of seats, in which case a coalition would play a huge role. So there is some validity in talking about the coalition beforehand, before the election.
So I don't mean to be too much of a constitutional lawyer here, but by convention, the Governor General will turn to the party that has won the most number of seats.
No,
to
they'll
see if
they'll turn to the party that has formed government. That's
in the past, that's correct. And then the party that
Yeah.
has formed the most number of seats, and then if they can't hold the confidence of the House, hopefully we don't have a repeat of the prorogation crisis. I'm confident we would not. Then it would turn to whatever parties can call it together, a grouping, working entity that has the confidence of the House.
Yeah, but that's the point. Is the confidence of the House is determined by whoever is able to gain the confidence of the House, which could very well be a minority government in coalition with another minority government.
Of course.
So there's no precedence to say that automatically whoever gets the most amount of seats gets to form government. Which is why the coalition conversation is important to have beforehand, because it could very well affect how the government is formed on October 20th.
I just want to say, some people wonder, because Stephen Harper, in 2008, when sadly Michael Ignatius backed away from a possible coalition to defeat Stephen Harper tried to say, well, we can't have coalition governments here in Canada, that doesn't work here in the British parliamentary system. Well, the British Parliament was governed by a coalition. So if the Westminster system in Westminster can have a coalition, we can do that here. And I just think there's such a will for change. Canadians want change, and we have to be willing to maybe suck it up a bit in our own parties to make sure that change happens.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly acknowledge Adam for being such a catalytic figure in this discussion. So, starting around discussion, that's great.
I'm doing the compassionate facilitator more than a catalyst.
Okay, thank you.
That's not a matchmaker, as Elizabeth said.
So moving on, we'll have a final question from the youth, and our gracious timekeeper will actually be the one asking this question. Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. Hopton. She's got enough on her plate already. Okay, thank you, Hopton. Take it away.
My name is Lapton. I'm one of the organizers of this event, and the question is actually from Rachel. She was one of the youth who gave the questions and couldn't be here, so I'll be saying this question on her behalf. What resources are being given and you will pledge to LGBTQIA young people and in particular racialized youth?
This is a question for Arif. Thank you, Hopton.
So the resources that we're pledging are, broadly speaking, to all youth, but they directly affect youth from disenfranchised communities and vulnerable communities. And I'm glad you've asked this because there's a number of points that need to be raised, but we are pledging to commit 40,000 new jobs per year over the next few years through a $1.3 billion investment. That is actually 13 times larger than what the NDP has committed in terms of an investment. That's 35,000 new jobs through the Canada Summer Jobs Program. It's 5,000 new jobs funded through Parks Canada. We're also committed to something that was referred to earlier, where we would be investing $40 million in co-op programs, where we would pay up to 25% of a co-op placement. In another component, what we are doing is we are putting in a $10 million investment in apprenticeship programs in the skilled trades. In a very innovative solution, what we have done is committed to ensuring that employers who hire young people aged 16 to 24 have a waiver for the employment insurance premium that they would otherwise have to pay for a full course of 1 year, so that's an incentive to hire on more young people. So these are very, very significant components in terms of getting young people back to work. in the skilled trades, in other areas, both in the summertime period, but also going forward in a post-secondary model after they're getting their education. So it's a robust plan. It's in a brochure that's at the back table if you want to find more details of it. It includes doing things like amending. Right now there's a 910-hour requirement that you have to fulfill in order to qualify for EI supports for skills and training. We would waive that requirement because of the precarious work the young people are now facing. They often don't fulfill 910 straight hours of employment. So what we would do is waive that so you're more easily able to access that training and that employment components to get you back into the workforce. Does it apply strictly to LGBT youth? No, it applies to all youth, but particularly youth in those vulnerable sectors, because those are the youth that we desperately need to pull out of poverty and get gainfully employed.
Let me just say, one of our NDP MPs has championed a bill on gender identity, including that in the Human Rights Code, and it passed the House of Commons, which was a huge victory, and then once again stalled in our lovely Senate, as my bill did on midwifery. So the unelected, unaccountable, and under indictment Senate managed to thwart the public will on this one. We would work with newcomer youth to help them gain the skills that they need to fully participate in society. We'll end the discrimination against the queer community in our immigration policy and make sure that violence against the queer community is grounds for refugee status, as violence against women should be grounds for refugee status. We have championed the urban worker agenda. So many young people, in fact, half of Toronto is working in precarious jobs. We want to make sure that those jobs have full access to EI. So unlike the Liberals who dug in and took $50 billion out of the EI fund to balance the books, the Conservatives have done the same. We'll create an independent EI fund that politicians can't get their hands on. That will only be for working people, for people who are unemployed, or to expand parental leave or for compassionate leave, and we'll make that independent. And we'll say that you can access this after only 360 hours, and it'll be a uniform rate right across the country instead of a patchwork quilt where you might get EI depending on where you live. We'll make it a uniform access, and I think that's going to help a lot of our so-called urban workers who are in far too precarious a position. I also talked about internships, highly exploited, special people need to pay their student loans back. Let's have paid internships, and let's outlaw racial, sexual, queer discrimination in the workplace, which the Conservatives have refused to do. Thank you.
Adam, did you want to say anything?
Sure. Yeah, I would unequivocally support any legislation or bill that put forward increased safety and consideration for LGBT plus issues. As well, you know, I don't have specific numbers about the Green Party and what we plan on spending specifically to that issue, but to address it towards young people, again, I would refer you to the jobs program with 160,000 jobs for people under 25, full-time, federal minimum wage of $15 an hour, free tuition. All these ways of empowering young people are really what are going to bring young people to the table to be more productive members of society.
Thank you. So we are now coming close to the end of this debate, and we'll soon hear the final remarks from the candidates here. First of all, a big round of applause for the candidates. Our interlocutors have been so engaged and patient. I just wanted to do this quick thing. I think it's sort of silly, but I like it. Whatever. There's this thing on Twitter called hashtag 6-word story. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. So I think the genesis behind it was Ernest Hemingway once made a bet that he could write a story in 6 words and make someone cry. And that's kind of how it evolved over the years. So you've got a scrap of paper ahead of you. I think most of you do. So if you want to just think of a 6-word story, so it has to be within 6 words, and it would be your message for the young people of Canada, what would it be? And let's insert some Jeopardy music. No, okay. But yeah, and then we'll once you're ready, we'll give it about 10, 20 seconds, whatever. But it has to be 6 words, and make sure your Twitter handlers know about it, so they can also tweet about it on Twitter. Hashtag Ward 14 NP debate, all that jazz. Are you ready?
Yes.
Take it away.
Vote change, make history, vote NDP.
That's 6 words. All right. Adam.
Okay. Many tiny voices make much noise.
Very haiku. I like it.
I'm counting the number. But it's more thematic. So for me, it's just this idea that
Okay, so we started with remarks, and then now for the final remarks, you get 3 minutes again. Being very generous, it was supposed to be 2 minutes. It'll be 3 minutes. What the heck? And so you can take it away.
Well, Gaelic and Kalsang and the organizers, thank you so much for creating this forum, and thank you to all of you for participating. Give yourselves another round of applause. I have to say it's been an incredibly stimulating discussion, and I don't know about you guys, but I really felt like I was on the hot seat, so good job. Let me just say it's been an incredible privilege to work with the community as your member of parliament, pushing the federal government, trying to make change, taking the voices of Parkdale Hyde Park and amplifying those voices in the Parliament of Canada. And whether it's rail safety or environmental issues, whether it's housing, whether it's Indigenous rights, we have worked together, and I believe have made a difference. Those voices, every voice matters. In this election, it is about change. We have a choice. We can have more of the same old. We've seen the Liberal Party and then replaced by the Conservative Party, and now people feel, oh well, it must be time for the Liberal Party again. I'm asking you to open your mind and think a bit differently. We've been the official opposition. We're the party that created Medicare. We're the party that's not only going to defend Medicare, but expand Medicare with youth mental health investment, invest in housing. We're going to make sure that change really means change. We won 100 seats, over 100 seats in the last election, second in 120. We had the shortest distance to go to defeat Stephen Harper and make change. Our leader is principled. He's shown that, whether it's opposing Keystone XL or opposing C-51 and committing to repeal it. We have a principled, experienced leader who's a committed environmentalist. And in this election, we can make history and elect the first NDP government ever. And I want to say, when you're voting, think healthcare, childcare, the first new social program in generations, and then think Mulcare. But don't just think when you're voting. You have a role to play beforehand. Each and every one of you. It's not just you going out and voting. It's about you engaging other young people, engaging your families, engaging your neighbors about the importance of this election and of making change. We have an amazing, dynamic group of young activists in our campaign. Frankly, we have a lot of people who aren't old enough to vote, and they're so passionate about this election. This is the election to make change. I encourage you not just to vote, but to be part of it. Come and volunteer, join us, help us make history. Thank you.
Sorry, you said 3 minutes?
Yes, sorry.
So we've heard a lot in this robust discussion, and Peggy's right, we are in the hot seat, but it's possibly because the lights are so hot, actually. So we're sweating a lot up here. But it's very, very important in terms of what you're doing and participating this evening. It's important in terms of getting out and voting. It's important in terms of participating in campaigns. There is no doubt that there is an appetite for change in this country, and it is very manifest here in Parkdale High Park. It is very manifest here in Parkdale. What you have is some competing visions. What I find most amazing, however, when I'm at the doors, is that when I'm talking to individuals, they are finding that there are different policy positions that they were not necessarily expecting. The Liberal Party has taken a very bold stand in terms of what we are trying to do to achieve change. I've alluded to it at the start, I've alluded to it during the course of the discussion, but it's really three basic ideas. We are investing in this country in order to produce jobs and growth. We will make that investment even if it includes running a deficit. That's progressive interventionist policies, and that includes creating jobs for growth. Tom Mulcair, in response to the movement for change, has decided to pursue the exact same policy that Stephen Harper has tried and failed, which is pursuing a balanced budget. That has not changed, that is called the status quo. What we will be doing is investing in childcare spots, investing in creating housing, investing in creating public transit. The other two components I would urge you to consider is that whenever you take ideas in terms of progressive politics, people talk about reducing inequity, right? It's the hallmark of fairness about narrowing the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. What the Liberal Party is doing, and we're the only party that's talking about this, is asking you to think hard about a system where we have taxation rates that are the same, and whether we can envisage a different system, where you could have taxation rates that are less for middle income earners by asking the top 1% to pay more. It's a different view. It's about creating equity, not exacerbating inequity. It applies in the same way. I know many of you here are young, perhaps not many of you are raising families, but one day perhaps you will. And when you raise a family here, you subsidize people to help them raise their families. That's what the Liberal Party believes in. That's what I hope most of you would believe in. Right now, we've got a system where we have universal benefits that are provided across the board. We don't need to be subsidizing people who have 7-digit salaries to help them raise their kids. They don't need the help. When I explain that to people at the doors, they realize, yeah, that makes sense, Reef. Well, that's the Liberal Party's policy. That's not the policy of the other parties, including Tom Mulcair, which I find somewhat surprising. You have a chance to motivate change. You have a leader who's a harbinger of that change. He's a younger leader. He's a more progressive leader. He has a different perspective on everything that relates to from how we're adopting First Nations policies, to how we're going to employ youth, to how we're even going to deal with things like cannabis. He's daring to go forward in different areas because he understands the needs of young people, and I urge you to get on board with him and consider how you would vote in terms of change and motivating a change that gets rid of Stephen Harper. Thank you for your time today.
And last but not the least, Mr. Adam Phipps.
Thanks for your time, everybody, tonight. I want to thank everybody for coming out and for everybody who... Oh, thanks. That's not mine. Thanks to everybody who put on the event. It's been wonderful. What I want to talk about to finish off here is just, I want to encourage you guys to really think about the type of Canada that you want to see in the immediate future and in the long-term future. The problem I have is, in my vision of what Canada should be, I see Canada as this sort of bastion, this global bastion of human rights and health, and yet we have abject poverty in our own country. I don't understand how Canada can try to position itself as a world leader in terms of climate change. We need bold climate change action now, and yet we're unwilling to do these things at home because of corporate interests. I don't understand how we can go around the world and promote democracy and observe democratic elections in countries that are newly forming democracies, and yet we have this antiquated first-past-the-post system in Canada that doesn't reward most voters. So I want you to really think about what the vision that you have for Canada and ask yourself which one of the leaders is really going to represent that best. Votership is at 60% in the last election in Canada, and I'd really like to wonder what it would look like if 80% of Canadians voted. That's something that hasn't happened in decades, and it would be remarkable to see what that looked like. And part of the reason is because they don't want you to vote. They want to keep you feeling disenfranchised and unempowered, because then you're not going to ask for better from them. You're not going to demand that they make changes. You're not going to demand for the things that you want. And that's what they want. So what I would ask you to do is, like I said, think about the vision of Canada that you have, and then talk about it with people. You guys showed up tonight, so you guys are the ones that have enthusiasm. You guys are the ones that are still impassioned about the democratic process, at least a little bit. So I would ask you to share that enthusiasm with your friends, your family. Talk about the issues that are important to you on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. Tell everybody that you know to go out and vote and make a difference. Your voice really does matter. And the more you talk about things, like I alluded to earlier, these guys, the other big parties, are all listening to you. If you guys talk about stuff enough on Twitter, they will change their platforms to accommodate. If you tell your friends on Facebook enough things and everybody starts talking about that, they'll accommodate that. Because what they want is your vote. So make sure that you think about the candidate that you want, tell your friends, and you maintain that passion for democracy, and you go out on October 19th and vote. Thanks.
Seated for a couple more minutes. I just again want to thank all of our interlocutors for a very engaging, stimulating conversation tonight. I want to thank the Tenant Cafe. Big round of applause for that. Nuno has been awesome in granting us this space, and they've been very generous, providing us with chairs and the space and everything. And I also want to acknowledge all of you guys for coming again. Like, you could have been anywhere tonight, but you chose to be here. And for that, we're very grateful. Miigwech Tushina. And finally, I want to acknowledge that I also want to acknowledge Laidlaw Foundation, who provided some funding for this event, and Dribu, the organization that Kelsang and myself co-founded. We've led this; it's been great. But really, I just want to acknowledge the young leaders. I mean, your passion, your creativity, your brilliance, your integrity was amazing to behold in this past few weeks as we led up to this event. And when you see, look across the room, you may see a few individuals, but that effect that you're having tonight, candidates, will have an exponential effect. These people are leaders. These people are influencers. These people are connectors. These people are all kinds of amazing things. And they will take forth what you have said tonight and just spread it, the good and the bad. And it will, hopefully lead to a better, more representative, inclusive, and just Canada. So, anyways, thank you all again. And I would just want to, after the applause, I just want to invite all the youth leaders to come on the stage. We'll take a group picture with the candidates, and then we'll switch. So, thank you very much. Parkdale Community Legal Services as well. Yes, thank you for that. Alright, but young members, young folks, the leaders, Hagden, Sonam, Tashi, Shoden, Geche, Chosang, please come forward. And anyone who, Latushan, whoever, guys, bring them along. And if I can ask one of the people to take a group shot. Oh yes, there are also snacks, guys. So if you want to help yourself to snacks and refreshments, please help yourself. There's some salad, biscuits, cookies, all of that. And they're still selling drinks at the Tenant Cafe. So if you want to grab some decaf, latte, bug, Nuno.
Ready? 1, 2. Thank you guys. Yeah.
Okay, just stay 6 seconds.
Sorry. Very nice. Very nice. Very good.
Yes, I'm from Spain.